Sakhi
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. So satsang means association with truth. And so in this unique context, the idea is that through spending time together focused on the truth, the absolute truth, the non-relative truth, we can find access to that truth as a direct experience. That's the goal. And in evolutionary enlightenment, we are changing a little bit the dynamics of the conversation, because usually in satsang, the absolute truth points to the ground of being, a dimension of reality that has no form, that's timeless and formless and beginningless and endless and eternal. The ground of being is the ground of the totality of reality, but beyond birth and death. It's a place where nothing changes, and it's the ground of eternity itself. So usually in a satsang context, the teacher or the guru will refer all questions back to the ground of being or to the absolute truth, or to the nature of the self, as Ramana Maharshi would refer to it, always pointing the seeker back to the absolute truth. And if the teacher is good, if the guru knows what they're doing, they will not allow themselves to be distracted by anything except that which is absolute. So they'll always redirect the incoming traffic in the form of questions. They'll always point, the answer will always refer to the absolute or non-relative nature of the ground of reality itself. So remember, in a satsang context like this is not a forum for psychotherapy. This kind of conversation is always uniquely about transcending relative reality and transcending the relative nature of the ego and the personal self, and is designed to reflect back, if possible, to the seeker the highest dimension of reality, which is God consciousness or absolute reality. So remember, as the Tibetans make clear to us, there's relative reality, there's two truths, called the two-truth doctrine. The two-truth doctrine tells us that there's relative truth and absolute truth, relative reality and absolute reality, relative consciousness and absolute consciousness. So the manifest world most of us live in most of the time is a context in which relative reality is the norm. That's the world we live in. But the Vedantic notion of moksha, or the Buddhist notion of enlightenment, is found when we, in our experience of consciousness, we undergo a transition or an elevation from relative reality, from the experience and consciousness and cognition of relative reality, the experience of consciousness and cognition to absolute reality. So it's a journey from the relative to the absolute. It's a search for and the experience of radical, absolute, unconditional, and total transcendence of that which is relative. So that's the goal in this context, is to focus on the fact of absolute reality, the significance of absolute reality, and to point it out to people, to tell people how they can find access to absolute reality within the nature of their own self, because all the greatest realizers have told us throughout history that moksha, or spiritual liberation, or enlightenment, or emancipation, or true inner freedom, can only be found through having access to absolute non-relative reality. So the wounded ego, or the traumatized ego that's searching for a solution to its pain and suffering in the context of relative reality, in an enlightenment context, will never find the solution, because the solution in the enlightenment context is always only one, which is through the discovery and the awakening to absolute reality, we find the solution to our personal problems. And it's not a solution that we find through psychological understanding or intellectual understanding or emotional understanding. It's through experiencing a deeper and higher and more profound dimension of reality itself. It's a place where our personal self has never been born, never entered the stream of time, and it's never been hurt, wounded, or traumatized in any way. So it's discovering this primordial dimension of reality that we find liberation and freedom from suffering, and the solution to all of our relative problems, and all the problems that we suffer from have all occurred within the context of relative reality. So once again, in the enlightenment context, the solution to all problems is found with the awakening to the absolute dimension of reality. That's the idea. And it's very simple, it's very profound, and it always works when it works. So at the beginning of our time together today, we just maybe want to consider the fact that reality has two dimensions to it, relative and absolute. And that the ego lives and tells its story in the context of relative reality, and the true self, or the authentic self, exists in the realm of absolute reality. And when you experience the inner transition from your ego consciousness, small self-consciousness, to the absolute true self-consciousness or authentic self-consciousness, you suddenly find yourself feeling very differently and seeing reality very differently. Because the nature of the ego most of the time is based upon the conscious and unconscious assumption that something is wrong, something's terribly wrong. But the foundation of the true self is that nothing ever happened, therefore nothing could possibly be wrong. And the authentic self is based upon the conviction that the desire to exist itself, the urge towards existence, is overwhelmingly positive, is an expression of God's will to take form in this universe, as this universe, through sentient creatures like you and me. So we realize, when we awaken to the authentic self, we realize in a way that's very profound that the universe wants to exist. The universe wants to exist. In and of itself, the universe wants to exist. And this is something we can recognize and realize through a direct awakening to the evolutionary process. And the reason we're calling this an evolutionary satsang versus a normal satsang is that in evolutionary enlightenment, which is what I teach, we say that the sum totality of reality, the sum totality of all of reality, which includes everything that exists and everything that does not exist, includes both being and becoming. To repeat, in evolutionary enlightenment, we say that the sum totality of all of reality includes both being and becoming. Being is the primary ground of all of reality that I was speaking about before, which is the ground of being, which is the eternal ground of being, the ground of eternity itself. What the Buddha referred to as the uncreated and the unborn. It's birthless and deathless and timeless and formless and eternal, which I understand to be synonymous with what Ramana Maharshi refers to as the self, which is also timeless and formless and beginningless and endless and eternal. And we awaken to the ground of our own being, to the self, through the practice of meditation, if we're lucky, if we're very lucky. But more often than not, we have experienced this kind of awakening through the transmission of an awakened human being. Individuals who awaken directly to the ground of being, to the self, in a deep and profound way, in a way that remains permanent. Such an individual has been permanently punctured by the presence of the absolute. There's a hole in their being, and through that hole in their being, the vibration and the fragrance and the presence of the non-dual absolute reality pours through them into relative reality and in their mere presence, by assuming close proximity to their mere physical presence, and through the experience of sympathy with their persona, one can one can gain access to the radiance of their vibration, and through the direct cognizance and experience of the radiance of their vibration, one can awaken directly to that vibration itself. That's the idea of satsang. That's the whole point, really, is to awaken directly to higher consciousness through the physical proximity of the awakened mind of the realizer. But in the evolutionary satsang, we're not only interested in awakening to being, the ground of being, that which is birthless and deathless and timeless and formless and eternal, but we're also interested in awakening to Eros, the energy and intelligence that created the universe. When we awaken to Eros, the energy and intelligence that created the universe, we realize that the universe wants to exist, which is very good news, because a lot of people these days are not so sure whether to exist or the fact of existence is a good thing, because we're aware there are many problems in the fact of human existence these days. And the fact we're all confronted with so many problems that we sometimes wonder, why is the human experience so full of troubles, and why is it so perilous? Why is it so dangerous? Why is it so full of pain and suffering and war and death? And this has been a metaphysical and philosophical question and inquiry for thousands of years. That wise men and women have thought, why do I exist? Why do we exist? Is there an inherent point or meaning to existence itself? Or is this pointless? And is this merely a place of pain and suffering? So all of the greatest realizers who penetrated deeply into the nature of reality had this experience where they transitioned from relative reality and relative consciousness to absolute reality and absolute consciousness. With the dawning of absolute consciousness, there's a recognition that that inherent in the very source of reality, the source of existence itself, is a goodness, is a purity, is a grace, is a kind of positivity that's almost intellectually impossible to describe. Some people describe it as pure love, but I think doesn't really describe it. It's a pure positivity that is explosive and overwhelming and absolute and non-dual. And on the manifest side of this puzzle, in the manifest side of existence, when we awaken, we experience this pure positivity as being the very nature of this, being inherent in the very nature of the desire to exist itself. And it's not a personal feeling. It's an impersonal, absolute vibration that comes from the source of existence itself. And we realize that the universe wants to exist, or the absolute principle, or the God principle, we realize in this higher state of consciousness wants to exist as this manifest world and as this manifest reality. The universe wants to exist, as does life itself, and as does higher consciousness and mind. And when you experience this pure positivity, that's the nature of the urge to exist itself, that's so absolute and impersonal and radically true, all of one's existential doubt and confusion about life and the existence of the universe disappears, and one realizes that to exist is good. And the urge to exist is good, and the urge comes from the highest principle, which is the God principle, which is an absolute principle, which is the source principle of reality. So in a evolutionary satsang, we want to learn how to do the delicate dance between these two very profound expressions of the God principle, the absolute principle, one of which is being, which is non-existence, which is the vibration of reality that exists before the universe was even a thought in the mind of God. It's a vibration of non-existence. It's a vibration of reality before the Big Bang, before the universe came into being. There was a cosmic void or emptiness or nothingness. And this primordial emptiness or nothingness or no thingness feels like eternal peace. And the reason that it feels like eternal peace is because nothing ever happened before the universe was created. Nothing ever happened. There is no time, there is no space, there is no universe. There's no becoming, there's no beginning, and there's no ending. There's just eternal non-existence or being. And this can be experienced as a state of consciousness, beyond the mind, beyond the body, beyond space. You can awaken to this state of consciousness through deep states of meditation or through the presence of the awakened realizer. And it feels like that peace that passeth all understanding. It feels like freedom. And the reason it feels like freedom is because nothing ever happened yet. So before anything ever happened, nothing has gone wrong. Things can only go wrong after the whole process starts. But before the process began, everything was perfect. Before the process began, everything was perfect. Before the process began, everything was perfect. So in these deeper and higher states of meditative awareness, one can glimpse this perfection of non-existence, the perfection of being and the perfection of non-existence, the perfection that exists before the universe was created. And that then the experience of that perfection is enlightenment, absolute freedom, bliss, and perfect happiness. Remember, the desire to exist must have come from the mind of the creator, or the creative principle, which is called eros. So you can think of this in any way that suits you. You can think of the creator as you can think of the creator using an anthropomorphic lens, metaphorically, to help you relate to reality as a emerging process. Or you can see it and understand it as a pure process, a pure creative process. It's in progress. But it's clear that relative reality exists. The universe exists. And the universe gave rise to life. And life gave rise to mind. And mind gave rise to consciousness. And consciousness gave rise to self-reflective awareness. And this is when you hear people who study consciousness have said that consciousness has a quality or a particular feeling about it, and it's a feeling of being. It's a feeling of existence. It feels like something to exist. It means something to exist. To exist, it is something to exist, not nothing. And it's that something, that mysterious something, is what and who we are. But nobody can claim, nobody can name it. Nobody can say what it is. It's because it's an ultimate mystery that the mind, the rational mind, cannot penetrate. The mind can recognize the mystery, but it can't penetrate it, can't understand it, it can't grasp it. But it means something to exist. And inherent in this quest for the meaning of existence is the recognition that existence wants to be here. Existence wants to exist. So the manifest side of this understanding of this absolute principle, this God principle, is the understanding of what this absolute principle is as a spiritual principle. Some people call it love. Eros is love. But love in this context is not enough. It's love, and inherent in that love is this will towards existence and to becoming. Eros is creativity. it's the urge to exist and to become consciously part of the creative principle in the universe. And in our unenlightened states, sometimes we can glimpse what it would like to be a true partner in the creative process, to co-create the universe with the energy intelligence that created it. We say, oh, those moments of deepest unself-conscious creativity, when I feel the creative principle vibrating and pulsating through my body, through my mind, through my soul, I feel more alive than ever. And I always like to remind people that this creative principle can be located very easily in our own bodies and minds and souls. So the urge to exist is the urge to create, is first located as the biological command to procreate, or the sexual impulse. The ecstatic urgency of the procreative impulse is the desire to create that which is new in the form of biological life. And that is the experience of ecstasy. Eros is the experience of ecstasy. Eros as the creative principle is the experience of ecstasy. Creative freedom is ecstasy. The universe is a creative process, and when we experience the nature of that creative process at the level of our own souls, we experience the ecstatic nature of the God principle as the urge to exist and the urge to create. We all experience that as the biological command to procreate at the lowest level, and at a much higher level, human beings as a species uniquely experience this drive towards innovation. Human beings are the only species on Earth that we are compelled to innovate, to give rise to create that which is new. So a creative person is usually an ecstatic individual who's utterly obsessed with their talent to create whatever it is they're creating. But to give rise to that which is new is what the universe is trying to do through a creative person and through a creative people. That when we experience the urge to create that which is new and give rise to that which is new, it feels like a creative force is coming through us that wants to realize itself and give rise to higher and more complex versions of itself through our body, minds, and personalities. That's when we experience so much happiness, and now we're no longer troubled by why does the universe exist, but we're more overwhelmed by the ecstatic nature of existence itself. We usually feel overwhelmed with gratitude, awe, and wonder to experience the creative principle vibrating and pulsating inside of our body, minds, and souls. Is the experience of ecstasy, doubtless ecstasy, non-dual ecstasy. So the experience of creativity, liberated creativity, is the urge to innovate and give rise to that which is new, is what makes the human experience so meaningful, full of meaning, inherent, and purpose. A life of blind consumption and mad self-indulgence and consumerism leads to soul death. It really does. But when you realize that the creator God is Eros, is this energy and intelligence that's compelling us to participate in the life process with all of our souls and all of our being, you realize that the energy and intelligence that created the universe, which is what I believe the God principle is, wants us to be fully involved in the creative project of the universe. It's my conviction that that's why we're here. And finally, the highest expression of the creative principle, of the urge to exist, is the desire for higher consciousness. Where does the desire for higher consciousness come from? It doesn't come from your mind. The spiritual compulsion comes from the source of the universe itself. And spiritually awakened people are, and they constantly exclaim that they seem mysteriously awake to and cognizant of a cosmic principle that is compelling them to give more and to do more and to become more. And they always speak about the source. This is coming from the source of existence, the source of existence itself. But that's what it means to be grounded in reality, which means being connected to or awake to the source of reality itself. And you feel connected to reality, and you see that this experience that you're having through the body, mind, and personality, through the karma of the body, mind, and personality that you have, is all happening in a cosmic, in a nothing less than a cosmic context. And you see the whole drama of your own life and our lives unfolding in a cosmic context. And the cosmic context is of the universe in the process of becoming more what it can be. And you realize, oh, that's what's happening here. The life of my body, mind, and personality is the smallest part of this enormous process. And when you wake up to enlightened awareness, when you awaken to enlightened awareness in the form of eros, or this urge to exist and co-create the universe, co-create the whole process, you realize that you're actually the star of the whole movie. Not as an ego, not as people call it, a skin encapsulated ego, but as the creator, him or herself. That's who you really are. That's who I really am. That's who we all really are. I am, and you are the energy and intelligence that created the universe, awakening to itself and becoming conscious of itself through the body, mind, personality of each and every one of us right now. When you really wake up, that's what you see, that's what you feel. I am the creator of the universe. Vedanta tells us that there's only one I. Vedanta tells us that the ultimate truth about the nature of reality is that there's only one and not two. I am that, which means you. When I say I, I'm actually saying you. I am that means I am the only one that exists. Because Vedanta reveals to us that there is only one and not two, and that's the ultimate nature of reality. There's only one and not two. And as being, that one that's not two exists, has never been born, and will never die, and is eternal. And in evolutionary enlightenment, which includes the evolutionary process, we say, it is that I, that one without a second, that chose to create this entire universe, the entire creative process, came into being because that one without a second, which is you ultimately, at the level of your awakened soul, is the only one that could have been to chose to make all this happen. Who else could have done it except you? Not your ego, but your true self, your authentic self, the true you. You're the architect of this whole endeavor. Your intellect will never accept what I'm saying as being true because it sounds utterly ridiculous and absurd and foolish. But from an absolute metaphysical perspective, it's true. There's one creator appearing in the form of many creators. But as Vedanta keeps reminding us, there's only one and not two. And that's the ultimate truth, the highest truth, the truth that liberates. It's also true when we look at reality through the lens of the creative process, that there's only one creator, not many. And that's who you are. So in an evolutionary satsang, we're looking at this ultimate truth that there's only one and not two through the lens of Vedanta, which says that one has never been born and never entered the stream of time, and is birthless and deathless and timeless and formless and eternal. And we also look through the lens of eros, or evolution, which means That one without a second is the creator of the universe. The only one that could have been to create all this and give rise to all of this. And the only one who therefore is responsible for all of this, which is you. As frightening as that may sound, from an ultimate or absolute point of view, it's true. But one has to become very spiritually mature in order to be able to accept a teaching like that without shuddering and without doubt. So in the teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, we'd like to look at reality through the lens of being, through the lens of becoming. That's why I said at the beginning, the sum totality of all of reality is both being and becoming. Being and becoming, from the perspective of absolute reality, are one and not two. Being and becoming are one and not two. Being and becoming are one and not two, and yet both are absolute. Being is absolute, absolute being, non-duality as primordial, eternal being beyond birth and death, time and space. Becoming is also eternal. So in evolutionary enlightenment, we embrace the God principle or the absolute principle in both perspectives as being and as becoming equally. One does not have greater significance than the other. They both have absolutely equal, absolute significance. They both have equally absolute significance, which means you can unconditionally die into one, the being, or die into the other, becoming. They will both liberate you radically and completely. But the state of consciousness and the experience of that state of consciousness is different. Being is peace and becoming is ecstatic urgency. One is about non-existence and freedom from existence, and the other is about embracing the will to exist and taking responsibility for it, ecstatically, radically, and totally and unconditionally, because you are the creator of the universe. They're both true. It's a huge cosmic non-dual paradox. And for most seekers of enlightenment, or most meditators, this is kind of new information. Relatively new information. This is a more complex embrace of the totality of reality, which blends ancient perennial truths about the nature of reality with modern scientific understanding about the nature of existence. Very satisfying. Very challenging to live. When we awaken to being, timeless, formless being, we experience freedom from body, mind, and personality. When we awaken to cosmic being, timeless, formless being, we experience freedom from reality, freedom from existence. When we awaken to Eros, the energy and intelligence that's creating the universe, we experience an ecstatic drive to exist and to co-create the universe within us, the creator who gave rise to it in the first place. It's a big paradox. It's an inconceivably vast, overwhelming paradox. One is no relationship to manifest existence. The other is total relationship to manifest reality. It's an absolute paradox. That's why it's so extraordinary. But if you can embrace both dimensions of this paradox, you experience a multidimensional awakening, a multidimensional experience of enlightened awareness, in which you experience God as being and as becoming. There's no contradiction inherent in that when you really understand what they're all about. So we awaken to timeless, formless being, grounded being, what the Buddha was pointing to, what Ramana Maharshi was pointing to letting go of the mind. Very simple, easier said than done. But letting go of the mind absolutely reveals the grounded being, where there's no birth and there's no death and there's no coming and there's no going and there's only that eternal ground where nothing ever happened. In that eternal ground is freedom from desire, freedom from egoic consciousness, freedom from fear, freedom from craving, freedom from wanting anything at all except to be. Whereas when we awaken to Eros and we awaken to that, when we experience the source of the desire to exist and the indescribable pure positivity that is the source of the desire for reality to exist at all, to manifest. All we want to do is give everything we've got through this mortal coil that we've got for a little while to make this universe a more beautiful place. Because that's the only reason that we've been born in the first place. Beyond the idea that we need to procreate. From the creative side of this explosion of manifest existence, we realize that the energy and intelligence that created the universe needs our hands and our feet and our bodies and our minds and our souls to do his or her bidding in the world. I believe that. God doesn't exist as pure abstraction. God exists as what he or she has created. And human beings, at least as far as we know, are the very leading edge of that whole creative unfolding, which means you. So the energy and intelligence that created the universe as the creative principle is dependent upon you and me to do his or her bidding in the world. An overwhelming thought. What a burden to have. What kind of responsibility is that? It's inconceivable. But having that kind of responsibility keeps us out of trouble. Makes it less easy to get distracted and by things that are irrelevant, by materialistic concerns, by egoic aspirations, just by ignorance. When you wake up, you want your life to mean something beautiful, to mean something perfect, to mean something profound, to mean something significant. That's what spiritual practice done in earnest is all about, to make cultivate our vehicle, to make this vehicle, this body, mind, and personality worthy, so we can give our gifts for everyone else's sake. I know a lot of these things I'm saying are hard to believe, but they're true. Just because the rational mind finds these things hard to believe doesn't mean they're wrong. Remember, there's relative reality and absolute reality. When we awaken to enlightened awareness, we awaken to absolute reality. And from the perspective of the awakening to absolute reality, the picture changes. The rational mind in its perspective is no longer dominant. When you awaken to absolute reality, it's the absolute perspective. It's the cognizance of this non-relative context that changes everything. And minimizes the significance of the rational mind. Doesn't mean it's irrelevant, but it means it's no longer so important. It has relative importance, but not absolute importance. What has absolute importance in the context of enlightened awareness is the non-relative or absolute perspective itself, which to be understood has to be experienced. It can't be explained through words. And then you say, oh, now I understand. The ground is shifted. Now I see what you're talking about because I'm in that place myself. Then we have a different conversation.
चुनर भी के जा